Welcome back to Giants Latest. Hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all things Giants. Last week, Mike Kafka and Brandon Brown spoke to the media, and I want to talk about what they said because I think there were some good little interesting nuggets there. And I also want to talk about why I think that Mike Kafka could be the real winner out of everyone in the Giants organization if the Giants win a lot of football games this year. So we'll get to that. But first, Kafka was, of course, asked about the quarterback process, the fact that, since he's finally been here, he actually really got to choose his quarterback and be super involved in the process. So he said they had a very thorough quarterback process, and he's very excited about Jackson Dart. He said he felt confident, Mike, about how Jackson studied, operated, how he handled himself, how he prepared, how he performed on tape and in meetings. And one of the things that he said was that, obviously you're watching these guys on tape, catching up on all of that once the season is over. But then you have the Senior Bowl where he was one of the head coaches of one of the teams. You also have the Combine, the Pro Day. So you really get these experiences of one-on-one times with the players where you really get to know them better. And he said, this is where I really got to understand who Jackson was, what makes him special, and learn about his preparation and all of the things that he mentioned here, right? How he handled himself, how he prepared for games, how he feels like he's going to be able to grasp the playbook and things like that. He said, some of the things that he really liked about Jackson Dart, especially after watching his tape, was his explosive plays, how he operates under pressure and duress, and how he did during the 2-minute drill. Those were all specific instances that Kafka cited as to what he liked about Jackson Dart from what he saw on tape. He was asked, of course, about the plan and how important all of that is when you're bringing in a rookie quarterback. And he said, having a plan to develop the young quarterbacks is important, but it's also really important how you adjust that plan and make changes on the go. Is that, when you start off, maybe you have a 6-month, a year, a 2-year plan. It's like anyone who starts a new job, right? You have a plan for the first year, but if you're progressing, if you're going above and beyond and, you're hitting your deadlines and your goals well above what they had planned for you, then obviously, the track and the plan of when you're going to start or get that promotion, whatever it is, that all changes. So he said that that's really important when it comes to a quarterback and that they have a very set plan for Jackson Dart right now. But obviously they'll see how things go as to whether or not, he takes that step further sooner rather than later. He said meeting with the quarterbacks and explaining the intent that he has for every player and how to attack things is what really makes his role different as an offensive coordinator than as a quarterbacks coach. So when he was with Kansas City and they drafted Patrick Mahomes, he was the quarterback coach. So obviously he said, you're really in those meetings with the quarterback and your sole focus is on helping them develop and grow as a quarterback. But now as an offensive coordinator, yes, you get to do that a little bit too, but because you're not the specific quarterback coach, you also have these other things that you have to do. So when he's talking to Jackson Dart, he's saying, okay, this is the plan and this is the process that we have for you now. This is my intent on this play. This is what I want you to do, and this is why I want you to do it. And he said there's a lot of focus on dialogue and communication. And that's not just with Jackson Dart. It's with the rest of the quarterbacks and it's with all of the offensive players as a whole. So he talked about that. And, when he was asked, of course, about Russ and why, that was a big important move for the Giants to make, he said that his leadership is so important. And I know we've talked about this extensively and some people roll their eyes, but I'm going to give you examples of why he said that's so important. He said he's seen how Russ takes leadership, how he commands, and how the players listen to him. He said he's really respected already in the locker room. And the fact that he was with the Giants for only 2 weeks, he had signed his deal, done his paperwork, moved, did whatever he needed to do. Within 2 weeks of all of that being done, he had invited Jalen Hyatt out to Arizona. They had a private workout. He had met in Atlanta with the rest of the skill players. We saw pictures of this. I don't know if you guys saw them, but I saw them on social media where Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger and Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton and, a bunch of the other skill players were all with him working on building up the communication and the rapport that is so important between skill players and the quarterback position. And then on top of that, I don't know if you guys saw this, but just last week, Russell Wilson posted a picture of all of the quarterbacks, all of the offensive linemen, and all of the running backs after just having dinner together. So, leadership, I think, can seem like this big, vague idea of like someone standing in a room and preaching to you. But these are all examples of why Russell is such a respected leader. And I know when he signed with the Giants, there were some concerns that, Russell wasn't liked in different locker rooms and whatever. Whether or not that was the case in the past, it's very obviously not the case here. And you can see it in OTAs. You can see it in all of these meetings that he's doing with the players. And you can see it when guys like Wan'Dale Robinson talk to the media and talk about how excited they are to have Russell Wilson as their quarterback. And it's not fake. You can tell when players are lying or when they're doing their whole like media BS. That was not Wan'Dale. So anyway, I thought that was all interesting, especially hearing the differences between, what he did as a quarterbacks coach versus what he did as an offensive coordinator. He also said, that he mentioned Jameis and said that, he has a lot of experience in the league. And when they have these meetings that he's going through certain play calls and saying, this would be what I would like you guys to do. What do you think? Let's keep an open dialogue. Russell, did you like doing this in Seattle? Did you like this in the Steelers? What would you like to do that's different? So all of these things are what's going on. And, it all sounds dandy. I want to see it become wins during the year. So lastly, he said that when it comes to OTAs, their focus right now is developing speed and strength, that they do a lot of installations to see how much the players can regurgitate and give back to the coaches, and then see if they can show up and play fast. And he said that this is basically a test that they do for the players. And we heard about this back during training camp, the first year with Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll and Wink, that Wink was throwing all these different looks at him and he looks like a fish out of water and had no idea what was going on. Kafka is making it sound like they start this as early as OTAs, that they're bringing all these installs in, they're testing the players and seeing how they do. And if they notice that some guys can't keep up with it as easily as other guys, then their workload gets scaled down. Then they scale down the volume and they make changes according to that. So I thought it was really interesting that he mentioned like testing the players really early on, because obviously that is hopefully going to work out, that these players are able to learn. And that's how they figure out, throughout the summer season, what they can really install in week 1 versus week 10. Can these guys handle this amount of volume and this amount of play calls now? And if they're able to do it now, how much more can we add on to that? And we've heard that Daboll's offense is very extensive, that it's very challenging to learn. So I'd love to know if these guys are all passing the test and who's not. Lastly, he was asked about, calling plays, and he said that he's happy to do whatever Daboll wants him to do. He said that every year he's learning and growing, and one thing that he does focus on is studying other play callers across the league and, focusing on having an open dialogue throughout the offense. The last thing, he was asked about Evan Neal, and he said that he's doing a nice job with his transition to guard. So I was thinking about this, and I really think that Mike Kafka has the opportunity to make out like the true winner out of everyone. Now, obviously, if the Giants win a lot of games, Daboll's going to be happy. Fans are going to be happy. Mara, Shane, they're all going to be happy because they get to keep their jobs, right? But I think ultimately, even if the Giants win, let's say 6 games, Daboll's going nowhere, Shane's going nowhere. Even if they got fired, they would both get other jobs elsewhere. I think Mike Kafka, if he does well this year, he is going to be the biggest winner in the sense that I think he's finally going to get that head coaching job. Daboll already won head coach of the year. He already has a little bit of success under his belt, right? Kafka doesn't necessarily have that. Yes, he called the plays in 2022. Yes, he came from Kansas City. Yes, he worked with Patrick Mahomes. Ultimately, he's not the reason why Patrick Mahomes is who he is. He's not the reason why the Giants won those playoff games in 2022. He ultimately got play calling stripped away from him. So I think that we are really going to see an opportunity for Kafka to be the true winner. I think he's going to get a head coaching job and everything's going to go well for him if the Giants win this year, because it means that he's able to take Daboll's offense and take it a step further because he has the quarterback who can execute on what they've been wanting to do for the last couple of years, and they really haven't been able to do that. And I think that will say the most about Kafka, that he's good at calling plays, that he has improved play calling over the last couple of years, and look at what he can do if he has a functioning offense and if he just has a functioning quarterback who can push the ball down the field, which is one of the things that Brandon Brown said when he was asked about Russell Wilson. So let's talk about this, because like you'll see here, my last bullet is that I actually feel like maybe the Giants front office is like kind of functional again after all of the things that I heard from Brandon Brown, who I think is an excellent speaker and has done a really nice job. And I did actually think that if Joe Schoen got fired, then Brandon Brown was probably going to get promoted. Of course, he was asked about Abdul Carter. He said he watched 2 years of tape on Carter and loved it. Things that the Giants needed to improve upon was the rush, coverage, versatility, and forcing turnovers, and all of those things Abdul Carter is able to do and we will able to do with this defense. So being able to add him to this roster was so important, and he's obviously thrilled that he got him. He makes a really good point and says that the GM, the assistant GM, the scouts, all of these people are significantly ahead of the scouting process than the coaching staff is. And I know that sounds simple and it sounds obvious, but I think it's something that a lot of us forget, because all of the area scouts for the last couple years have been going to Penn State games, have been going to Ole Miss games. They know everything about Jackson Dart and everything about Abdul Carter well before Brian Daboll does, because during the season, he's only able to focus on the Giants. So I think it's really important that he mentioned that. And the reason why he mentioned it too is because he was asked about, he talks about Jackson Dart and Abdul Carter, obviously. But then, of course, he's asked about guys like Darius Alexander and Cameron Skattebo, where Skattebo really had a breakout year last year. Like, how did they know that based on 1 year, he was going to be projected to be a good player for the Giants? And why would they pick him over, someone else who maybe had 2 or 3 steady years of increased growth? And he said, I really call out our area scouts for that. They really do an amazing job. They are focused on these players for years. They have been focused on the small schools like Toledo, where Darius Alexander maybe didn't really get the playing time. And by the time they got to Mobile and they actually saw Alexander in person, he already knew a lot about him from the area scouts who had called out to him and said, you need to keep your eyes on this guy. This is a guy to meet, a guy to focus on. So this is the stuff that makes me feel like maybe our front office is not a total wreck. It just took a while to get here, but like maybe they're functional and they actually know what they're doing. I don't know. Maybe. He said that Dart is unique in the sense that this was very interesting to me. So when they were in Mobile and they have these meetings with the different players, right? They finally get the chance to meet them. Then they have the combine visits, the pro days, and then, any other meetings that they're able to have prior to the draft. He said that he asked every single player that he met with, if you could take one other college football player, who would it be? And he said, a common name throughout a lot of them was Jackson Dart. And he said, I am talking different position groups, different schools. This is not just the SEC. This is not guys who played offense. This is defense, special teams, offense, obviously, and then players from different demographics, different schools all over the country. And the fact that so many of them said Jackson Dart, he said, that's extremely unique to me. And that was something that really proved to me that from what I've seen on tape to what I see in person, this guy is who I think he is. He said, guys gravitate to them. He sees that he puts the work in. And that when you have these private workouts and these guys specifically call out Jackson Dart, that really means a lot. So it got me a little excited about Jackson Dart, dare I say. He was asked about risk analysis and said, of course, that's a big process, but he said that Joe Schoen does a really good job with their process and that this year they were not surprised by anything that happened in the first round, which I thought was fascinating. He said they knew when they got to the 20s that Jackson Dart was going to be there and they were going to be able to get him. They just had to figure out from their risk analysis standpoint what was worth it to give it up to move down for him, and ultimately they're happy with the move that they made, and of course they think that he's the guy. So lastly, 2 things. So he was asked about Russell Wilson, like I said. He also said he's a good mesh and he fits in the scheme. Talked about the leadership thing, why that was so important. And then, of course, the workouts mentioned that he brought in these guys right after meeting them and that was so important. And he's instilling, confidence and hope into these players that we can get there. So this was a really good question by Ryan Dunleavy. He said, you brought back 91% of a 3-win team. Why did you do that? Fair question, Ryan. I like it. And this is what Brandon Brown had to say, which I also think was a great answer. He said, in the question, Ryan mentioned the fact that the roster is so young. And this is something that Brandon Brown also spoke about, that they have one of the youngest rosters in the league, especially, I'm pretty sure, on defense prior to this free agency. Excuse me. He said that the key that Ryan mentioned is the fact that the roster is so young. and then they know guys are going to make mistakes and they have room to grow, but they are building this nucleus of a young team that is learning and growing together. And he said they really felt like in free agency that they were in a good position to bring in solid veterans that were going to be able to complement the talent that they already have on the roster. So they made strategic additions in free agency, and experience and leadership and capabilities that come with being a veteran in the league, all of those things were so important. And that's why they really focused on upgrading the secondary and complementing it with guys like Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland. So I thought that was a really well thought out and great answer. And I also thought it was a great question because I've seen that from Giants fans too. Why are we going to be any good this year when, 90% of the team is the same? And I think that's a fair question, but you have to look at the fact that in very specific positions that are necessities, like the quarterback position, we upgraded. We upgraded on D-line. We upgraded a lot in the secondary. We've got a new running back, and ultimately they didn't bring in a new wide receiver, but I still think there's a lot of competition there and we can ultimately be good. So like Brandon Brown said, I just really feel like they finally have a functioning front office. And I know there's been a lot of complaints about Joe Shane, especially the fact with the 2022 draft, but I think when you look at the whole of drafting and, what it looks like, Brandon Brown talked about this too, is the fact that, your first year here, they all got hired in January. You have 3 months to figure it out on how you're building this roster by April. You have to figure out what you're doing in free agency and in the draft. Plus, they didn't have a lot of money to spend. They were kind of cornered into what they had to do with Daniel Jones. They obviously made the decisions that they made, and not every decision that they make is going to be smart or it's going to be right. But I feel like they have really learned from that. And I think ultimately it's up to the coaching now to make it work, because I think this roster is better than where it was last year. It's significantly better than where it was back in 2022. And it's up to Brian Daboll now to prove that he's a good coach. And time will tell if he's able to do that. So stick around and we'll find out whether or not he can.